You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, everyone. I have one name for you. When you think Robert Ludlum, the Bourne Supremacy, Jason Bourne, the new book, The Bourne Shadow, who do you think of? Nobody but Brian Freeman, the only person qualified by the Robert Ludlum estate as the official author to continue the famous Jason Bourne series. We're super excited to have him back with us today. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM, Brian.
Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
We're super excited about this beautiful book and the beautiful cover for all of you YouTube watchers.
Oh my gosh, yes. Didn't they do a fantastic job with that?
We loved when we got this in the mail, the advanced reader's copy. We're thrilled. And before we get started, let me remind our listeners to tell them a little bit more about you. Brian Freeman is the author of 30 novels that have been sold all around the world. He's won a lot of awards, very well deserved. Best hardcover novel at the annual Thriller Awards. He was a finalist for the Edgar Award Best Paperback, finalist for Edgar Award Best First Novel. These are really great endorsements. We believe he's one of the best writers today. We're thrilled that he's continuing with the Bourne legacy. I like the quote that I found on your website. Brian says, "My goal is to write books with haunting characters and a lightning fast pace. My stories are about the hidden, intimate motives that draw people across some dark lines." Yeah, we couldn't agree more. And this book does not disappoint. I want to give one quote because Kristen and I really agree with this. Book Reporter says, "Brian Freeman has done the finest job keeping Bourne's legacy alive. He is a thriller. This book is a thriller of the highest caliber." Yep, we couldn't agree more. Brian lives in Florida with his wife, Marcia. Got to give her a little shout out because she's a partner in life and in the book business. And both of you are working closely to keep connected to all of your readers. We're thrilled to have you.
Yeah, glad to be back.
Well, Brian, we like to give our listeners just a little bit of what's going on in the book. So if you'll allow me, I'll give them a summary. Sure. I will not give away any spoilers.
No spoilers.
It is so hard with a book like this, but we are here to talk about The Bourne Shadow. We just loved it. We were on the edge of our seats. Chris and I call each other as we're reading books, and we love the back and forth, and we usually have pretty similar reactions. We just loved it. This book delivered on every level. So just a little bit of the background. Most of us know the backdrop of the Jason Bourne series. We have a young man named David Webb. He was recruited to a Black Ops agency named Treadstone by Nash Rollins. And, you know, over time, lots of operations have taken place. And at one point, David loses his memory. He suffers a traumatic brain injury. He took on the identity of Jason Bourne. At times, he was also known as Kane. And he's still piecing together these different periods of his life, trying to figure out who he is. Now, there's one particular operation, it was his first, that he has a lot of uncertainty about. And this is what this book revisits. It goes back to that first operation during a very violent winter. He's got little snippets of memories about what occurred. Right now in this book, he is living in Paris as Jason Bourne. And there's a very contentious presidential debate and campaign that is going on in France. We have a right-wing extremist group that is wreaking all kinds of havoc and fomenting protests. The name of this group is Le Renouveau. And we also have an establishment candidate who is opposing this other candidate. And there's a lot of back and forth going on. But Jason Bourne is approached by a woman who recognizes him under his original name, David Webb. He doesn't know who she is exactly, but she says she is the sister of his former fiancee, Monica. And together they feel like they've got to find Monica. She may be in some danger. They traverse Europe. He's starting to piece together things little by little. But at every juncture, there are secrets that are starting to roll out. This book was so exciting. Did you want to add anything? Because I'm worried about giving away a spoiler.
I think you have set the stage perfectly. That's exactly where we are. And I'm so amused that, life is imitating art and art is imitating life. I wasn't thinking about, the reality of French elections when I was writing this book last year, but now here we are this summer, the book comes out, and it's almost as if the folks in France were sort of getting an advanced copy of the novel.
It is a bit of a political story. And I loved it. It's current, talks about what's happening all throughout the world, maybe even today. I like this one quote that an evil man said, not going to say who. Polls mean nothing. Events are everything. Look at the violence on the street. There's only one issue for families in this country who want to restore the safety of our environment, restore peace. But yet, we see this clandestine rebel group, Les Renouveaux, stealthily recruiting followers, naive college kids, disgruntled average Parisians. What happens when we can only see the chaos on the street and not these shrewd minds that are fueling it?
Yeah, I think that I think it all sort of goes back to Bourne's mantra, which is trust no one. He's faced so many betrayals in the course of his life, and has found out that so many of the people that he thought he loved, he thought he could trust, have been lying to him, and plenty of more lies and betrayals that he'll discover throughout this book. But I think for Bourne and for what's going on and sort of the macro elements of the book, it's the same thing. It's the idea that what we're being told is not necessarily something that we should believe, and the people that are pulling the strings like marionettes are doing it not necessarily with our best interests at heart, but simply from a standpoint of what's the best way to achieve power. So trust no one is what Bourne says, and I think sadly that's a pretty good lesson for us to take in any kind of political situation, that we have to be fairly cold in assessing what people are telling us.
Mm-hmm. And this is why we love him so much, because he sees and suspects and understands things that the average citizen can't. And I heard this quote the other day: who holds the real power, the dictator or the influencer? I thought that was interesting, because we on the streets only see one thing. Jason watches the streets very closely, but that didn't convince him, did it?
Yeah, exactly. He's watching a riot unfold in Paris near the very beginning of the book, and he's not looking for who's actually doing the violence. He's looking for who's pulling the strings. So he's watching the crowd to see where the people are who are actually coordinating what seems to be, a random, spontaneous act of violence, and it actually is something that's being stage managed and orchestrated from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. We've got a big election coming up in this country, but I'm not even going to get into that.
That's another show. Brian, this book was full of thrills and edge of your seat excitement, but there were a lot of beautiful elements to it too. Very, very lyrical, actually. And I love the imagery of the tides at Mont Saint Michel and the Northumberland coast. Both locales have a causeway that nearly disappears at high tide. And there was a quote that a woman says to Jason, and her quote is, "Time buries us all like a rising tide." Now, this could be taken as a sign of hope if you're looking at the long game, or maybe one of futility. What did she mean? And I was wondering if you thought that that was something that Jason took to heart and changed his perspective at all.
Yeah, and I do love those areas. I've never had the opportunity to visit Mont Saint Michel, but I've visited the English equivalent, which a lot of people don't know about, which is St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall. Very, very similar sort of structure, and again with a causeway leading out that gets covered by the tide. And of course, Holy Island up in the Northumberland area, just off the coast, is such an amazing place to visit. My wife my wife and I have been there a couple times, and we love Holy Island. So I like, honestly, I like taking places that I love and making terrible things happen there. So I'll tell readers that I usually use settings of places that I really enjoy, and they'll sort of look at me and go, "Oh boy, what do you say about the places that you don't like?" So but this idea of the causeway and of the tide coming up and obscuring the road, I mean, there's so many interesting layers and symbols that go along with that. And part of it, I think, is the idea that what's old is new again, and the tide leaves, and then the tide always comes back. And you could sort of say the same is true of the past, that no matter how much you try to run away from your past, it always seems to creep back in on schedule behind you. But you could also look at it that she's suggesting to Bourne the opposite, and saying that, time buries us all like the rising tide. It's time to let go of the past and let go of the lies and betrayals, and live your life. And I think that's the lesson that Bourne takes away. But is he able to do that? That I'm not sure about. I think when you've forgotten so much of who you are, it's awfully difficult to sort of let go of that mystery. You sort of constantly feel drawn to getting more answers and finding out what's going on. And Johanna in the book, says it to Bourne. Say, why are you so obsessed with getting these answers? How is it going to change your life? And I think he acknowledges that it's not, he can't really stop, but he feels like if you don't understand your past, if you don't really know where you came from, then you don't really have a way to move forward. So does Bourne learn the lesson? I don't know. I guess we're going to have to wait and see how the next couple of books unfold.
I've been to Mont Saint Michel, and I agree with you. First of all, there's a feeling of it's mystical and it's a timeless place, but it also reminds me of there's nothing new under the sun, because there is that tide that comes in and it goes out, and that's been happening for hundreds of years. So that's a very excellent illustration that you use throughout the story. This book this was deep. There's a lot of things to really contemplate, and I think that's what Jason was doing throughout the story, is contemplating the big things in life.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I think that's one of the reasons why Bourne makes for such an interesting hero, and why readers connect with him is exactly that sort of complexity.
Well, I got another reason why we love him, or I love him anyway. Jason Bourne falls in love. He just does. He's a tough guy. He's gone through post-traumatic. He's lost his memory, but he still falls in love. The character Vandal said, when he fell hard. He needed somebody in his life regardless of the dangers that it brought. So we saw him with Monica, Nova, Abby. I'm not going to say who's next, readers. You got to read the book to find out, but there will be someone next. Was love Jason Bourne's weakness, or maybe his strength? And does he need a weakness in order for the reader to relate to him and really care about him?
Yeah, is it his strength or his weakness? I really think it's both. I think if you look at Jason Bourne in Robert Ludlum's original books, and then you look at Bourne as he was in the movies, as portrayed by Matt Damon, two very different characters. I think what you see in the action movies is more of the loner. He's on his own. He doesn't want anyone in his life, so he kind of keeps to himself. I think that's very different from the Bourne that Ludlum created, because when you look back in the original books, Bourne's wife Marie Saint Jacques is such a fundamental part of the story arc and of who Bourne is, and that's what I've tried to take away from Ludlum's original series, is that Bourne needs someone in his life. He needs someone that completes him in that way. At the same time, there's a little bit of the push me pull you, that he also knows that anyone who is in his life is automatically in danger and at risk, and he faces the issue of anyone that he's in love with, he's also, creating a dangerous situation for. So he wants to get close to someone, and yet at the same time he wants to push them away. And so that's really kind of the essence of who Bourne is. I think that psychological complexity is what makes him really interesting for readers. He's not sort of a typical superhero. He's not someone that simply, is the same in every book and there's simply different action going on around him. He does have weaknesses, and he's certainly a strong and capable sort of operative, and yet at the same time, he's got these flaws that make him human, and he's struggling with sort of basic fundamental issues of identity. Who am I? What kind of a man am I? What sort of a moral man am I? And I think, as human beings, we all do the same thing. And, we may not do it on as dramatic a level as Bourne faces. And yet I think those are questions we constantly ask ourselves as we go through life. And I think that's partly then why readers really connect with a hero like Bourne.
Absolutely, because you brought out the human quality and we can all relate to him. Shockingly, we can relate to Jason Bourne. And it's a great thing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Brian, I want to dive into something you said a little deeper. The Bourne series has always been about this idea of identity and exploring it. And one of Treadstone's foundational principles was, and this is a quote, never give away who you really are. Now, your thriller takes that exploration, I think, to even a next level, even maybe revealing the core of who Jason Bourne is and maybe what his identity is as he understands it. And I wanted to ask you, do you think it's impossible to suppress your true self? Like, even if you have amnesia and you've had trauma and you've tried to even adopt another identity, is that even possible?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that the whole issue of identity, which is sort of the foundation of Bourne's struggle, it really is a question of what constitutes our identity, what makes us who we are, and I think all that we can really say is that it's all of the different choices that we make in our life that ultimately define who we are. And so I think that's something that we all struggle with in terms of can we learn from our past, and are we defined by what our past was? It's funny. I would occasionally, get questions from readers about, if you could go back in your life and change elements of your life, would you do it? And I always assumed that the answer would be yes, because of course, who wouldn't want to go back and correct their mistakes? And then I wrote a book called Infinite, which actually it's the most unusual story I've ever told, because it almost grazes on the edge of sci-fi, and it deals with parallel universes and this hero Dylan Moran that gets to see different sides of himself and different choices that he's made. And he's struggling with this whole idea of, can he reinvent himself, and can someone who has made mistakes in his life be able to move past those and find himself a new direction. And I think that the lesson that came out of Infinite, and what I'll tell people these days is, I've tried to let go of mistakes from the past, because as soon as you go back into your past and start pulling on one thread, you don't know how it unravels the rest of your life. And we are at the point we are because of all the things that have happened to us and all the things we've done, the mistakes we've made, the good and the bad. And if you go back and start to sort of smooth over and correct the things that were wrong, it changes ultimately who you are, and it really changes your identity and how you go forward. And I think Bourne is an example of that. And what makes it harder for a hero like Bourne is that we at least have the opportunity of thinking about the choices we've made in the past and trying to learn from those choices and use those to guide and inform who we are today and what we're going to be tomorrow. Bourne doesn't really have that. He's in this vacuum where he doesn't really know where he comes from, and as a result, when he's facing a particular choice, all he can sort of have is the moment around him and trying to decide, what's the moral thing to do in this circumstance, without that lifetime of experience that the rest of us have to try to guide ourselves.
Yeah. Well, we may not have amnesia, but we certainly have blind spots about aspects of our lives.
Sure.
And I also wanted to tell you, I thought it was very cool that you looked at this issue of identity against the backdrop of an extremist group where identity becomes primary, and that might not be their true identity. And, Chris had mentioned this book has, so much applicability to what's happening in the world today. And I think that is a very primary way. What is our identity? Our political affiliation? Is it something else? And what happens when those identities are in conflict with one another?
Yeah, and again, this idea of what can you trust of what someone is telling you, and what face are they showing the world? I mean, there's one scene. It's not what I would call a pivotal scene to the action of the book, but it's a very important scene in terms of how I wanted these characters to unfold. There's a member of a political group who's been taking the Paris metro and is going up the escalator to the plaza, and there's a woman who's being hassled by several other people. And seemingly this man is helping her through this, and is acting very, very kind and involved. But then you realize that in fact he's even more horrifying than the people that were hassling her. And that was it's a small moment in the book, but a very pivotal moment in the book, to be able to sort of reflect that the dual faces that people show, and being the necessity to sort of look under the surface and find out what's really going on.
Absolutely. Oh, that was excellent. That scene did not go the way I thought it was going to go. So that was pretty cool. Well, we loved this book, The Bourne Shadow. We love the cover. We love what's between the covers. It will absolutely keep you entertained and thrilled. And before we let you go, Brian, we're wondering if you could tell us maybe what's on your radar, what's coming up next for you.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy stretch here. I've actually got an all new standalone thriller called Break Every Rule. That's going to be coming out on September 10th. So just as folks are finishing up The Bourne Shadow, they'll be able to dive into to a new book. And I won't make you wait very long for another Bourne novel, because I've already turned in The Bourne Vendetta, which will be my sixth Jason Bourne novel, and that will actually be coming out in January. So the next few months will be a busy Freeman season.
Oh, that is wonderful. Is that the final title?
Yes, The Bourne Vendetta.
Excellent. Oh, we absolutely love it. Well, we want to tell our listeners how they can connect with you, because you've got so many fantastic books, including Infinite that you talked about today. So we'd love for readers to go to your website so they can see what else is there and what's coming down the road. You're at let's see, we've got a couple different ways to get in touch with you. bfreemanbooks.com. You're also on Facebook, on X, on Goodreads, on Instagram, and we just hope that you come back and talk about your standalone book that's coming out in the fall. We would love to talk to you further. And we want to encourage everyone. We loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're getting him back for sure. We somehow worked a lot of words of wisdom here from Brian Freeman into this interview. That's going to give us food for thought. Don't miss this one. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Thank you.
Wow. I mean, after this discussion, everyone is going to want to pick up this book. This is one of the more important Jason Bourne books, I think, because the character is really progressing. And I just can't stop thinking about what Brian said about not having every experience and everything that we went through in life forms who we are today. And would we really take away something bad because maybe it set us on a new courageous course of change or movement? That really made me think, what if you would go back, Kristen, would you change something?
I have asked myself that often. In fact, I think you and I have asked each other that question, and I struggled with it because, there's things that I might do differently, but then I might not have my children. And would I trade them for anything? Never. So I don't think so, because those threads that could unravel might unravel something that is beautiful or difficult, but it helps shape who I am. Where did you come out on that debate?
I like that answer. I just thought of it in a different way, the way he described that. And I love that. The only thing I would change is I would really like to be a CIA agent. I could take a whole different course. These books are so exciting. And I'm like, wow, this is some kind of a cool life. But for those of us who can't do that, we can read it. We can become it in the novel. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the identity issue that you said. And were the lies and secrets that are kept from Jason Bourne by Treadstone, did they protect him in his identity, or did they ultimately hurt him? This is something I thought about for a while.
Yeah, I thought about that too because they knew his weaknesses because somebody was a shadow. And so there's a lot of knowledge about who he is and who his makeup is, but it doesn't allow for growth and it doesn't allow for him to reflect on who he is. So they were basically trying to address the weaknesses without letting him know that that's what they were doing. It was very parental. But that really robs people of that maturity aspect in their lives.
Yeah, then I
What
have
do
to
you
think, are secrets lies?
I think that it's a lie by omission.
Mhm.
And especially when it goes to the core of who you are and how you became associated with this Black Ops agency, right?
Mhm. Good point. So much to dive
Yeah.
into. Just loved
Yeah.
it.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, I want to tell our listeners about some of the authors that we have coming up. We have some other amazing authors that you will definitely enjoy. We've got Preston and Child, Angel of Vengeance, Jamie Brenner, A Novel Summer, Jeffrey Deaver and Isabella Maldonado, Fatal Intrusion. We've got Amy Runyon, Mademoiselle Eiffel, Shelley Noble, The Colony Club, Amy Neff, The Days I Loved You Most, Jessica Strasser, Catch You Later, Fran Littlewood, Amazing Grace, MP Woodward, writing for the Tom Clancy series and franchise, Shadow State, and Lori Frankel, Family, Family. And listeners, thank you so much for spreading our socials. We ask that you continue to do so. We've got listeners, I think, in 89 countries, 1,800 cities, all 50 US states. That is so amazing. And it's because you are enjoying these authors and the discussions that we are going really deep with them on their books. We want you to stay on our radar as well. You can find us at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. And as always, listeners, until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.